You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Thursday. We're back and doing it after taking a day off. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day except for yesterday, but we'll make up for that on Saturday. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And apologies, I do have another cough drop in due to this razor blades in the throat situation that I've been having going for the last, since Sunday night. Really the only symptom I have, so I don't know. I should probably get that checked out. Anyhow, today we are going to at least start by talking about the George Helow departure. We're going to give the due diligence that he deserves for Michigan, for being at Michigan for 2 years, because it is a disappointing day for me to officially hear, hey, he's moving on. Granted, we knew that was going to be the case, but he was one of my guys. I have a lot of really fun George Helow stories that I can't share because that would be betraying the trust of George Helow. But he's an amazing dude, and he's an amazing coach, and he's just everything you want in a human to be molding the minds of the younger players, right? And he did an incredible job in Ann Arbor with what he inherited, because you have to keep in mind, while we're very excited about the prospects of what Chris Partridge brings to the table from both an on-field and a recruitment standpoint due to what he did in Ann Arbor, Chris Partridge at least had a Devin Bush to work with for, in his first 2 years, the 2 years he was the linebackers coach. George Helow didn't have that per se. Yes, did he have Junior Colson? He absolutely did. But when it comes to the guys that he was, he got Junior Colson as a true freshman. So part of that is being able to mold him into what he did, which was a freshman All-American. Just looking at the 2022, well, first we'll look at 2021, just PFF, and I'm just going to take a quick gander. Nothing's really going to jump out at the page, I can tell you that. But the guys that he inherited were Josh Ross, who Michigan had long been high on, but did not get a lot of love from the fan base. And he departed with a lot of love from the fan base. Michael Barrett, Nakai Hill-Green, who we didn't really get to see last year, Anthony Solomon, Jaden Hood. There's a long list of Ben Van Sumeren initially, and before he transferred to Michigan State, before George ever coached in a game, right? I'm missing another important one that I'm blanking on. Oh, and Joey Velasquez. So it's not like he had a murderer's row of guys. And you can see that the guys love him, especially even the recruits. With the report this morning by Bruce Feldman, Samaj Bridgman basically was like WTF with this news. So he's really formulated a really good bond with his recruits. He was instrumental in bringing Ernest Hausman to Ann Arbor. So it is disappointing. It does kind of seem like it is a little bit more one-sided than it's being, it was a mutual parting of the ways, but in some senses it doesn't seem particularly mutual. But I think he did an incredible job in being able to bring his guys up to the standard that Michigan needed. Because linebacking core, preseason last year, I had them. Preseason the last 2 years, I had them as like the lowest common denominator, and they weren't really. There were certainly issues here and there, but that's any position group. So, I wish that this had a little bit better, looking at PFF, a little bit better of a. So, Joey Velasquez doesn't really count here, but he was 14. So that's last year or 2 years ago. Let's go with the 20%. Looking at PFF. Well, it doesn't have Michael Barrett there. Michael Barrett was with a top guy too, but Josh Ross ended up being 18th as far as being a linebacker in the conference, and Nikhai Hill-Green 28th. I mean, certainly guys ahead of him, but guys that we've heard of like Leo Chanel, Jack Sanborn, JoJo Doman from Nebraska, Jack Campbell were the guys that were ahead of him. Curtis Jacobs, Olakunle Fatukasi, who's one of my favorite names in football. That was in 2021. And in 2022, I expect to see a couple of names a little bit higher. Michael Barrett and Junior Colson, 12th and 13th in the conference, behind Jack Campbell, Tommy Eichenberg, Cam Jones, Abdul Carter, the guys that we've heard of a lot, Jay-Sean Barham. Pretty amazing what he was able to do with those guys. To be able to turn them, especially Michael Barrett. Michael Barrett was a guy that seemed just lost at sea. And then by the end of Helow's term here, this 2-year term, he moves on as one of the players that people are most excited about. All right, we're going to continue talking about all of this and then just kind of figure out where we're going from here. As I'm sure you can tell, I'm still kind of struggling here. I know there's so many people that are like, dude, you're always sick. I know, trust me. Sarah was even telling me the other day, like, you've got to start seeing the doctor, man. And I'm like, I know. I'm one of those people that just doesn't go to the doctor. Probably because a lot of times I go to the doctor and they'd be like, this is wrong. And it turns out it's not. So there's a lack of trust there between me and the medical profession. Anyway, the midpoint of the NBA season is here and now, and is the perfect time to download FanDuel, download that app, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockdown. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so like I said, George Helow did a lot more with less, I think. And yet, I know people are very excited about Chris Partridge due to, I mean, he was Michigan's best recruiter in the 4 years that he got to be an on-field recruiting type guy, right? Not being just a recruiting coordinator, but I mean, he did a great job as a recruiting coordinator as well. Responsible for Rashawn Gary, responsible for all kinds of guys. But that shouldn't mean that we should celebrate the departure of George Helow, who I think, I mean, obviously, he's a guy I call a friend, so it's a little bittersweet for me in that sense, because I just think that he gets overlooked to some degree due to the job that he has done. And I mean, he was the reason why Michigan was in it for Raylan Wilson. And I remember talking to him at a camp over the summer, and he was like cautiously optimistic that we'll get to keep him. That's high priority, but it's going to be hard to keep him away from Georgia. Sure enough, that's ends up going to Georgia. That's not surprising. You can be the best recruiter in the world, and that's going to be a hard pull. Florida kid that's getting lured by the national champions. But I think that when you look at his track record, his integrity, all of the things that George Helow brought to the table, he's going to be missed in that. He's going to be missed in that locker room. I had a chance to really watch him coach with the open practices and such. And I mean, he was just phenomenal to watch. Just really teaching guys. And it wasn't just, and I know in retrospect, a lot of people are probably going to be like, well, maybe he should have been on some of those stars. But even at the bowl practices when we got to watch, it wasn't just like, all right, I am going to focus solely on Junior, Michael, and whoever else is out there. It was, I'm going to focus on everybody. I remember he was sitting there really working with, I believe it was Jaden Hood, just really going to town, really making sure that everything was the technique was up to snuff, and it's like, all right, let's run it again, let's do it again, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's what you want from a guy, is that he's not going to he's going to try to raise the floor. And I know some people might say time and place, but he was just phenomenal at doing what he did. Now, there is that trade-off, right? We do know that Chris Partridge is good at being a linebacker coach or just a defensive coach in general. And while Ole Miss's defense didn't necessarily, with him being the sole defensive coordinator, didn't necessarily look amazing this year, at least in Lane Kiffin's eyes. Let's see. Total defense. So Michigan was number 6 in the country once everything was said and done this past year. Ole Miss really fell off as the season went on, and they ended up finishing 75th. So let's start with, he worked with Durkin, I believe, the last 2 years. Chris Partridge did. And Ole Miss went from 126th in 2020. In 2021, they improved to 97th. And then in 2022, like I said, ended up 75th. So that's at least a little bit of a climb. And, you have to keep in mind that Ole Miss is playing teams like Alabama and LSU. And I'd have to take a look at their schedule here to see what other teams they play. So, I mean, they played Alabama, LSU, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, which wasn't that good this year. Being in the SEC West is a difficult proposition. They haven't had to play Georgia in that time frame, but it's still a difficult proposition to get them up to snuff when it comes to that. So certainly they've had games in which they've done really well. Against Alabama, they only gave up 317 yards. That was actually one of their good games. They lost that game, but 317 yards against Alabama in November, no less. I believe that was a Bryce Young game. That's to be commended. LSU is where things kind of fell off. Arkansas, not good. Tulsa, not good, but actually the rest of the schedule, Texas A&M, not good as well. Auburn, not that great. Most of the other teams that they played, pretty good. So, Chris Partridge was able to put together a little something, and now he's not even the guy that's going to be calling all of the plays, right? He's going to be responsible for a position group. We saw the ascent of Devin Bush in 16 and 17, more so 17 and 18. So he had 1 year with him before he moved over to safeties for 2 years. We know that he is certainly a capable linebackers coach and an even better recruiter. So how much more did you get? You definitely get a better recruiter because the track record says that's the case. As far as on field, it's a little bit of a mishmash because while the linebacking core looked really phenomenal in 2017, it was like a surprise at how good it was, considering it was yet another year like this past year when everyone said Michigan's defense is going to take a step back, and it really kind of didn't. It started with the middle. Now, your defense is only going to be as good in a lot of ways as the middle, as the linebacking core. Now, that might seem counterintuitive to how we've seen things play out in Ann Arbor with the front, the front being kind of the engine, which helps affect the back end. But generally, the teams that are have those championship level defenses have incredible players in the middle and incredible coaching in the middle. I think Michigan's at least had incredible coaching and eventually started getting what we could say is closer and closer to incredible players. So I will be very curious to see how things play out now that it's going to be a new face there coaching. At least he has the familiarity. Chris Partridge does. But I think that George Helow did a phenomenal job, and I wish him more than all of the best in for wherever he ends up. And it's disappointing that, especially this late in the game, that he has to go and try to find something else. He steadily rose through the ranks after being a GA assistant at Georgia and being a coach at Colorado State and Maryland and all of that. Just very personable, and I wish him the best and hope that he lands on his feet someplace good and continues to ascend. And certainly, I mean, people were talking about him being a potential defensive coordinator of Tulane. So, I mean, that's at least how people are talking about him, is he is a future star. And it always seems like Michigan's got really, I mean, even after after Chris Partridge slid back and we got to see Anthony Campanelli, Michigan's had some pretty good luck with some pretty decent linebacker coaches. I think that's been an interesting development, and Helow is another one in that line of guys who I think have done a really good job. All right, we're going to continue on. Just final thoughts here. We'll just do kind of like a potpourri to really pull from the old Jeopardy of it all, because again, my strength is not that great at the moment, but we will return here in just a moment. All right, one of the thoughts that I've had coming out of this break is it's funny to me. It's going to be funny to watch who Ohio State replaces Washington with, because Ohio State canceled the Washington series that they had on the books due to USC and UCLA coming in. And I don't know what their future schedule is as far as what other team they have on the radar in 2024 and 2025. I know that they have series with I believe Texas and Oklahoma, just like Michigan does, and they do with Georgia, but that's way down the line. But it'll be funny, especially if they end up if their non-conference ends up being not much of anything as well. But it's just one of those things that I think is really kind of interesting and funny. Anyhow, what ESPN came out with an article here saying what Michigan needs to do to get back into the CFP here. They basically said nothing that's terribly surprising, ultimately. And it's that they're going to need those big names to do what you expect. But what's interesting is that ESPN actually gave a little bit of credence to Michigan that we haven't seen in the last couple of years, while still, S&P or SP plus. I got yelled at by Bill Connolly for that once. SP plus. It's not the S&P 500. Has Michigan behind Ohio State, but ESPN here actually does state that they will truly be viewed as the team to beat in the Big Ten for the first time in recent years. Now, 2019 did happen. I remember Michigan was voted as the preseason favorite. Didn't go that way. But I will be interested to see if now we do start seeing the preseason predictions of Michigan winning the conference. But according to ESPN, the big thing is, it says Michigan's not going to sneak up on anyone. They shouldn't have snuck up on anyone last year, and I don't think they did. I just think that they bludgeoned people. But they said that it's going to come down to J.J. McCarthy and him being able to upgrade his game. And I think that we saw that late in the season. I really do. Aside from the 2 pick sixes, he doesn't throw those 2 pick sixes. Michigan wins against TCU, and at least we're talking about a guy who went to the national championship in his second year. Whether he won it or not, it would have been a big feather in his cap. It's still a feather in his cap that he made it to the playoff first year as a starter, because he did a lot to help Michigan in once he finally came out there and led the charge. But the other part is just needing the transfers to contribute. Ernest Hausman. It listed Ladarius Henderson and Miles Hinton as the linemen. Again, I think Drake Nugent is being underrated. I think that Drake Nugent is a guy that is going to be... I think he's going to end up being that starter in the middle. I think he's going to end up being the guy, at least this year, him and Ladarius Henderson, that people are talking about. And I'm going to add AJ Barner to that. Here's the good news for Michigan. They brought in so many guys that can be really good, big-time players by the transfer portal that I can't just pick one. That's awesome news. That's awesome news. So we'll see how that plays out. But, I mean, that's pretty glowing that it's kind of like ESPN's like, yeah, Michigan's really good. They should be the favorite. They just need a little bit more from the quarterbacks and have their transfers to play up to potential. And they don't even mention all of the guys that I think that will play a part in that. I think what's interesting to note, and we'll probably talk about this next week, is that Michigan's fifth in Bill Connolly's returning production. Because if you were to go back and look at previous years, and I haven't done that, but Michigan was usually like either low end or middle of the pack. Last year going into the season, it was middle of the pack. Now, Michigan ends up going into the season being number 5 in the country, number 1 in the Big Ten. I can't tell you how big that is when it comes to returning production. That is where you make your money, essentially. You can count on a team being generally good or bad. And there's other things that come into play, like recruiting. And if you've got a bunch of guys that can come in and be instantaneous, great players right out the gates. But you can count on a team, if you look and see what their returning production is, if it's high, don't be surprised if those guys if that team ends up being pretty good. And if it's low, think back to 2021, going into that season, everyone was talking about Northwestern coming off of the 2020 season and being like, yeah, they're not going to fall off. And I was screaming from the rooftops that Northwestern, the least experienced team in the Big Ten, was going to be awful. And no one in the national media was saying that. And I'm like, look, they lost everybody. They're not going to be good. Lo and behold, last 2 years, it's been awful for Northwestern. It's a pretty good indicator of where a team's going to be. Now, sometimes you get the right ingredients, much like the Fab Five, having a bunch of young guys that can come in and make an early impact. Less likely in football than in basketball, but sometimes that happens. But generally, teams that really coalesce, it's a good mix of guys who have the experience, have the talent, have the capability, and maybe an infusion of younger players that have the talent that can come in and make a big impact early. All right. That's going to do it for me today, keeping it short and sweet. We'll be back with a mailbag. The plan is, assuming my throat is at least at this level, which just feels more gravelly than razor bladey. Well, we'll be back with a mailbag on Friday, and then we'll do a post-game reaction to the Michigan State basketball game over the weekend. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you again very soon. Peace.